Of course. Here is the paraphrased script, maintaining the same gripping and articulate style while slightly altering the word order and sentence structure. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The sickest family scandal ever revealed in Mississippi was that he had children with his own grandmother. A phrase that alone causes chills and discomfort, yet it represents a dark reality from the isolated swamps of Humphreys County, Mississippi during the 1960s. In the small community of Belwan, the first rumors about the Caldwell family began to circulate during the summer of 1962. The Caldwells, isolated on a swampy property miles from the nearest town, rarely appeared in public, and when they did, any social interactions were avoided. The family matriarch was Margaret Caldwell, a woman of 58 years at the time. Having been widowed for more than 2 decades, Margaret lived with her grandson, Elijah, 27, who had returned to the family property after a 1957 car accident claimed his parents' lives. Located in the depths of the swamps, the property was an almost inaccessible location for visitors, surrounded as it was by murky waters and dense vegetation. Every time the family appeared in town to buy supplies, the residents of Belzone noticed something strange. They always seemed nervous, looking over their shoulders as if they were hiding something. The true horror of the situation began to unfold when, in October 1962, Margaret gave birth to a child at the local hospital. For a woman of almost 60, the event was already extraordinary. But what shocked doctors and nurses was Margaret's absolute refusal to identify the child's father or offer an explanation for how she had become pregnant at that age. Immediately, Dr. Howard Reynolds, the physician responsible for the delivery, noticed that something was wrong with the newborn. The child presented significant facial deformities, fused fingers, and an abnormally reduced cranial size. This was documented in his confidential report, which would only become public decades later. Fearing the worst, local authorities initiated a discreet investigation. Sheriff James Wilson assigned young Deputy Robert Thompson to monitor the Caldwell property. We received reports from neighbors about screams and strange behaviors. We needed to verify the welfare of the children who supposedly lived there, Wilson explained in an interview given years later. What Thompson discovered during his routine visits to the property gradually built a case that would shock even the most experienced investigators. Not only did Margaret live with her grandson Elijah, but also with 3 other children, all presenting deformities similar to the newborn. The older children barely spoke. They had evident motor difficulties and facial features that indicated serious genetic problems, Thompson reported in his personal diary, discovered after his death in 1998. The truth only came to light when one of the children, approximately 5 years old, was hospitalized with severe pneumonia in January 1963. Upon examining the child, the medical team noticed signs of neglect and possible genetic problems consistent with cases of consanguinity. When questioned, Margaret finally broke her silence. She simply said that Elijah was the father of all the children, reported nurse Susan Parker, who was present during the confession. She said it without any emotion, as if she were commenting on the weather. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. If not, subscribe now to not miss exclusive revelations about the most disturbing family cases in American history, cases that will never be shown in mainstream media. Your place in the community that uncovers society's darkest secrets is guaranteed. Not only the small community of Belwan, but the entire social services structure of the state of Mississippi was shaken by Margaret Caldwell's revelation. How could such a perverse relationship have remained hidden for so many years? And most importantly, how did the authorities allow for children to be born from this forbidden union? To fully understand the Caldwell case, we need to go back to 1957 when Elijah, then 22 years old, returned to the family property after his parents' death. According to local parish records, Elijah had left Belwan years before to try life in Memphis, Tennessee, but due to social adaptation problems, he never managed to establish himself. Elijah was always a strange, withdrawn boy, commented Reverend Thomas Williams in his testimony to authorities. When he returned after his parents' death, he seemed even more isolated from the world. Margaret welcomed him as if he were a small child again, not an adult. Locally known as Devil's Swamp, the Caldwell property was practically inaccessible during the rainy seasons. The only dirt road leading to the house would be submerged for months, effectively isolating its residents from the outside world. This geographical condition was crucial in keeping the family secret for so long. Social worker Jean Roberts, assigned to the case in 1963, described the Caldwell house as a museum of horrors frozen in time. According to her report, the residents had no electricity or running water. The walls were covered with old newspaper clippings and disturbing drawings made by the children. The most shocking thing was the naturalness with which everyone interacted. The children called Margaret Mommy and Elijah Daddy without any indication that they understood the abnormality of the situation, wrote Roberts. The devastating impact of consanguinity on their health was revealed by medical examinations performed on the 4 children: William, 8 years old, Sarah, 7 years old, James, 5 years old, and the newborn, Thomas. All presented microcephaly to varying degrees, congenital heart problems, and significant intellectual disability. The children's problems were consistent with the accumulation of deleterious recessive genes, typical of consanguineous relationships, explained Dr. Lawrence Peterson, a geneticist consulted by the authorities. When genetically very close individuals have children, the probability of congenital defects increases dramatically, he explained in his report. But the most disturbing aspect of the case came to light when authorities discovered diaries kept by Margaret since Elijah's return. The writings revealed a mind distorted by years of isolation and possibly untreated mental illness. Margaret described how she reconquered her grandson, emotionally manipulating him after the traumatic death of his parents. "He is mine now, as he should have always been," she wrote in an entry from 1958. "We are the last true Caldwells. We need to preserve our lineage at any cost." Further investigations revealed that the Caldwells' isolation was not just geographic, but also cultural and psychological. Margaret had been raised in an extremely closed community during the Great Depression, where, due to isolation and poverty, marriages between cousins were common. In his book *Delta Secrets, Isolated Communities of Mississippi*, local historian Dr. Robert Johnson documented how certain families in the swampy regions developed their own rules and moral codes, often in conflict with the laws and norms of the broader society. These communities existed in a cultural vacuum, perpetuating practices that dated back to previous generations, Johnson wrote. In the Caldwell case, we have evidence that Margaret herself was the daughter of first cousins, which may partially explain her distorted view of family relationships. The year 1963 marked the beginning of the judicial process against Margaret and Elijah Caldwell, one of the most complex and disturbing cases ever faced by the Mississippi judicial system. The charges included improper relationship, child neglect, and psychological abuse, terms that barely captured the true nature of the crimes. During the preliminary hearings, it became evident that Elijah was also a victim. Psychiatric evaluations revealed a man with the emotional development of a teenager, completely dependent on his grandmother and unable to fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. Elijah Caldwell shows clear signs of prolonged psychological manipulation, concluded Dr. Richard Matthews, the forensic psychiatrist appointed by the court. His capacity for true consent is questionable considering the control exercised by Margaret since his youth. The authorities faced an unprecedented ethical and legal dilemma. While public opinion clamored for severe punishment, experts argued that the case required a more nuanced approach, considering the complex tangle of mental illness, cultural isolation, and possible genetic factors that contributed to the situation. Held behind closed doors to protect the children's identities, the trial saw Margaret, then 59, remain impassive throughout the process, refusing to show remorse or even acknowledge that there was something wrong with her relationship with her grandson. She genuinely believed she was protecting her family lineage, explained Dr. Elizabeth Parker, the psychologist who evaluated her. In her distorted mind, she was fulfilling a kind of sacred duty to preserve what she called the pure blood of the Caldwells. National notoriety came to the case when the *Washington Post* published an investigative report on the horror in the Mississippi swamps. The article, while careful not to reveal details that would identify the children, exposed the systemic failures that allowed the situation to persist for so long. How can a family isolate themselves so completely in the middle of the 20th century, the article questioned. Where were the neighbors, social services, local authorities before innocent children were born condemned to a life of suffering? the question of community responsibility became central in discussions about the case. Many Bell 1 residents later admitted that they had noticed strange behaviors from the family, but chose not to interfere, following the unwritten code of privacy that prevailed in southern rural communities. Here in Mississippi, we learn from an early age not to meddle in other people's business, an anonymous resident explained to the Post-Star. Now, I wonder how many other families like the Caldwells still exist hidden in the swamps and mountains. Narrator's voice becomes more emotional, And you who are watching this video now, can you imagine the isolation and silent terror experienced by these children? If this case touched your heart, type in the comments, "No child deserves to live in darkness." Your comment helps keep the memory of these victims alive and raises awareness about the importance of community vigilance to protect the most vulnerable. A primary concern for the authorities became the fate of the 4 Caldwell children. Child development specialists were consulted to determine the best course of action. Separating the siblings could cause additional trauma, but keeping them together meant finding an adoptive home willing to accept for children with significant special needs. Dr. Catherine Stevens, a specialist in childhood trauma, worked intensively with the children during this transition period. Despite everything they suffered, they demonstrated a deep connection with each other, she reported. Sarah in particular assumed the role of protector for her younger brothers, demonstrating remarkable resilience. An important precedent for how the Mississippi judicial and social assistance system would handle similar cases in the future was established by the case. New policies were implemented to improve monitoring of isolated families, and social worker training was expanded to include identifying signs of improper relationships. In September 1963, the trial of Margaret and Elijah Caldwell concluded with a verdict that reflected the unprecedented complexity of the case. Margaret was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Elijah, on the other hand, was declared unable to respond criminally due to his mental condition and sent for treatment at a state psychiatric institution. This case represents a failure not just of 2 individuals, but of an entire society that allowed such horror to occur under our noses, declared Judge Harold Thompson in pronouncing the sentence. Let it serve as a warning about the dangers of extreme isolation and community indifference. But the true legacy of the Caldwell case was just beginning to unfold as experts tried to better understand the consequences of consanguinity and provide adequate care for the 4 children. The medical team from the University of Mississippi, led by Dr. Walter Reynolds, meticulously documented the conditions of the Caldwell children, creating one of the first comprehensive studies on the biological effects of extreme consanguinity in the United States. The children presented a spectrum of anomalies consistent with homozygosity of deleterious recessive genes, explained Dr. Reynolds in his study published in 1965. Beyond the evident physical deformities, all demonstrated cognitive impairment to different degrees, cardiovascular problems, and increased susceptibility to infections. Sarah, the second child, presented the least severe condition with an IQ measured around 65 and less pronounced physical deformities. The oldest, William, suffered from frequent seizures and progressive visual impairment. James struggled with chronic respiratory problems, while the youngest, Thomas, faced the most serious consequences, including severe cardiac malformation that required frequent surgical interventions. Severe criticism was faced by the state of Mississippi for how the system had failed these children. In response, Governor Paul Johnson Jr. established a special task force to reform child protection services, especially in isolated rural communities. The Caldwell case exposed systemic failures that we can no longer ignore, the governor declared in an official statement. Every child in Mississippi deserves protection, no matter how remote their home. Inspired by the story of the Caldwell family, a generation of social workers, doctors, and researchers deepened their understanding about the consequences of consanguinity and the importance of early intervention in cases of extreme family isolation. When genetically very close individuals have children, the probability that harmful recessive genes will manifest increases dramatically, explained Dr. Mary Williams, a geneticist from Harvard University who studied the case. In the Caldwell case, we saw this magnified by generations of isolation, resulting in a devastating concentration of deleterious genes. Family records recovered from the swampy property revealed that the Caldwells' isolation did not begin with Margaret, but dated back to at least 3 previous generations, with evidence of marriages between cousins since the 1870s. The Caldwells represent a case study on how geographical isolation can lead to genetic isolation, observed Dr. James Peterson, a cultural anthropologist who studied isolated communities in the southern United States. The swamp was not just a physical barrier, but also a barrier to the genetic diversity necessary for a healthy population. Meanwhile, the 4 Caldwell children faced the challenge of integration into a society from which they had been completely isolated. After months in temporary homes, they were finally adopted by 2 different families, William and Sarah by a couple of teachers from Jackson, and James and Thomas by a family of doctors from Memphis. Specialized training was received by the adoptive families to deal with the specific needs of the children, and they were connected to a support network that included specialized doctors, therapists, and educators. These children need not only medical care, but a chance to experience a normal childhood with love and acceptance, stated Dr. Stevens, who continued to monitor their progress. It's remarkable how even after years of deprivation, they still maintain the capacity to form healthy bonds. Follow-up reports showed slow but steady progress. Sarah, in particular, flourished in her new environment, developing social skills and even surpassing some of the doctor's initial expectations regarding her cognitive potential. An unexpected twist to the Caldwell case came in the autumn of 1978 when Margaret, after 15 years of incarceration, died in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. The autopsy revealed something no one had suspected. Margaret suffered from a rare genetic condition called mosaic Turner syndrome, a chromosomal anomaly that affects approximately 1 in every 2,500 women born alive. This discovery casts a new light on the entire case, commented Dr. Reynolds, who continued to study the medical aspects of the Caldwell family. The condition partially explains how Margaret managed to conceive at an advanced age, something extremely rare, and may have contributed to her psychological dysfunctions. The discovery rekindled academic interest in the case, now from a more compassionate perspective that recognized Margaret not only as a perpetrator, but also as a victim of her own biology and cultural isolation. Coinciding with Margaret's death was Sarah Caldwell's high school graduation, now Sarah Johnson after adoption. Contrary to all initial expectations, Sarah had become a dedicated student, overcoming many of her initial limitations through intensive therapy and the unwavering support of her adoptive family. Sarah represents the power of human resilience, affirmed her adoptive mother, Elizabeth Johnson, in an interview with the Clarion Ledger-Star. She transformed a horror story into a testimony of overcoming. At 22, Sarah made a courageous decision to use her experience to help other children who were victims of dysfunctional family environments. She enrolled in the social work program at the University of Mississippi, becoming a passionate advocate for the reform of child protection systems. "I don't remember much about my early years," Sarah admitted in a rare public testimony during a symposium on child protection in 1985. "But I carry the scars, both physical and emotional. If my story can help prevent other children from going through the same, then all the suffering will have some purpose." Different paths were followed by Sarah's brothers. William, whose medical conditions were more severe, remained dependent on specialized care until his premature death at age 26 due to neurological complications. James achieved a semi-independent life with constant support, working in a protected environment and living in an assisted community. Thomas, the youngest, faced multiple heart surgeries throughout his life, but developed a remarkable talent for art, creating paintings that expressed his unique experience. In 1987, almost 25 years after the discovery of the case, Elijah Caldwell died in the psychiatric institution where he had spent most of his adult life. His doctors reported that he never fully understood the nature or consequences of his acts, remaining in many aspects with the mentality of a manipulated adolescent. Dr. Richard Matthews, who followed Elijah for decades, reflected, "The Caldwell case forces us to question the boundaries between victim and perpetrator. Elijah was shaped by forces that were beyond his understanding or control. Trapped in a cycle of abuse that dated back generations. The Caldwell property in the swamp remained abandoned for years, becoming a kind of haunted site in local folklore. In 1992, County authorities finally demolished the deteriorated structure in a symbolic effort to close this dark chapter of local history. However, the legacy of the Caldwell case lives on in the legislative reforms it inspired, in the medical protocols developed to identify signs of consanguinity, and in the increased awareness about the dangers of extreme isolation. What happened in that Mississippi swamp in the 60s may seem like an account from another world, commented Dr. Elizabeth Parker during a lecture at Harvard University in 1998. But similar cases, although perhaps less extreme, continue to exist in isolated communities throughout the country. Vigilance and education remain our best prevention tools. To this cause, Sarah Caldwell Johnson dedicated her professional life, establishing in 1995 the New Beginnings Foundation, a non-profit organization focused on helping children rescued from abusive or dysfunctional family environments. Her unique perspective as both survivor and professional brought an invaluable dimension to the field of social work. Every child deserves the chance to write their own story, free from the errors and traumas of previous generations, declared Sarah in her speech upon receiving the Mississippi State Humanitarian Award in 2001. We are not defined by our past or our genetics, but by the choices we make when we finally gain the freedom to choose. Something positive was eventually generated by the Caldwell case, with all its horror and tragedy, a deeper understanding of the effects of consanguinity, significant reforms in child protection systems, and, through Sarah, a powerful voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. If you watched until here, it's because you like this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe to access more exclusive cases like this. Take a moment to like this video and share it with someone you know would also be interested in this impressive story. Each subscription, like and share helps us continue to reveal these obscure secrets of American history that deserve to be told.